Welcome to AuthentiCity FM. I'm your host, Mike Sable. I'm joined as always by my friends and colleagues, Phil Corrali and Corey Spiegel. And we're going to start this episode as a continuation of episode 11. So if you want to know how MacGyver, Elsa, Lego, the movie Inside Out, and Black Trees all fit into one coherent framework, stay tuned. It's going to be great. I'll see you on the other side. So that was a little bit of a weird open. So I'm going to kind of go for folks who didn't listen to episode number 11. I'm going to say a couple of things. Number one, it is a terrific episode. It's a little eccentric. It's a little quirky. Please go back and listen to it because it's going to make this one a lot more interesting. Well, one of the leads of that show was really MacGyver, the hero of 1980s TV who could work himself out of any situation with a few ingredients pulled out of a pocket and could get out of any jam. And that's really what it feels like to be a Gen X manager these days. The world is more complicated. Things are harder. And so we actually have to kind of maneuver our way out of things. But there's another important piece, and that's Elsa from Frozen. She sang arguably one of my favorite songs. And if I have enough to drink at an ICMA conference, I can actually do the whole scene from beginning to end. There is video evidence of it. I promise you, there are 3 people who have it. I'm not going to tell you their names, but it's a real thing. I say all of that to say, listen, Elsa helped us let it go. And that was how we're moving on to this other thing. So the third part about this is Lego. This is the thing that we can use any one of our tools to build something new and create. It's an old model, but it actually can work in many different settings. The fourth thing I want to talk about is Inside Out, and this is the main character of that show, which if you've seen it before, it usually makes grown adults cry. The main character is joy. So how do we build things with joy? Last thing I want to talk about is Black Trees, because it was announced today that the Timberwolves are bringing back the black tree uniform from the 90s. This is a Gen X flashback from the days of Kevin Garnett and Sprewell, and it's going to be incredible. So I'm excited for this year's Timberwolves year. Corey, I rambled for as long as I could to set you up for an amazing talk. Please rein me in, bring us back to what the topic at hand is, which is a continuation of a really robust conversation we had earlier this week. I turn it over to you. And Phil, please tell me that's from your own drawing from today.
It is not my own drawing. This is a drawing of my 7-year-old's making, and I think it's pretty darn good, although she was unhappy with it because Elsa's hair is not quite what she was hoping for.
Well, I think it looks great. All right, Corey, bring us back to the real world, please.
I don't know that I can put us back on the tracks from that because, like, the pinball machine just started flying around. In my office back in the day, I had an Elsa wand from one of the many Disney on Ices we had been to in my son's earlier childhood. And so the idea of let it go was prevalent in my office. And Legos, we're not going to talk about the consumer value of what's in my basement, but I think you can appreciate the little heart ornament back there behind me. But I say all of that that we started this conversation about the crisis period that we're living through. And as I was driving to pick up my son today, I had this moment. I was reflecting back on that episode and thinking about if there was anything insightful I could add to this one. And I'm like, man, the last week has been like having a toothache. Like, something's wrong. It hurts, but you're almost afraid to go to the dentist and find out what it is. And so that's how I would kind of frame up this era that we're living in right now. And you always talk about protecting institutions, specifically democracy. And I think the last week has taught me right next to democracy, and they really are correlated, is free speech. And we've seen that happen through all sorts of different venues recently. And so I think that's really important as we propel forward into leading through the last leg, right? I don't run. I couldn't do a 5K if I wanted to, more or less a marathon. But we're in that last stretch of a long run. And we're probably out of water and protein packs and everything else. And so how do we make it to this last stretch? And that's where Inside Out really comes in. And Inside Out 2 is the absolute best. We saw it in the theater way too many times. And yes, I did cry because it's fantastic. But I also
All the grown-ups cry at Inside Out 2, particularly. It is the heavier of the two movies, but the better. It's just a great storyline. Such a
left
great storyline.
thinking, thank God that this exists as I'm a parent in this era.
Yes. I said the same thing.
Because we ended up having all sorts of conversations that he had words for, that I had words for, and we could ground. And I think to tie it back, that was a big off the rails movement. But to tie it back, that's what this next era in the workforce is going to be, is we're going to learn new languages. We're going to talk about things very differently. And we're going to have to be comfortable letting go of the things we built.
I want to pull at that last leg of the run conversation for just a second, because what I think, if you've never done it, what I think you don't understand is how hard it is to provide the mental strength to get through it, right? That last whatever, whether you're trying to finish a 5K, a 10K, a half, a full, an Ironman, whatever it is, you will be talking yourself out of getting to that finish line so frequently, constantly, in fact, in those moments. You are exhausted, you're done. You've done everything you think you can do, and you're just like, I don't care, right? I'm not going to win, so what is the difference? What if I, and it's, so tie that mindset into where we are right now. As we talked about last time, in this turning, we're nearing kind of the last leg of this turning, 08 to 30. It's 2025, folks. We're running it. I've never done a full marathon, but I've done about, I don't know, 16 or 18 half marathons. I will tell you, at mile 12, you're just like, screw it. I don't care. I don't want to do it anymore. It's awful. It hurts. It's hot. I'm thirsty. I'm hungry. I'm tired. But you get through to 13.1. And why do you do that? It's because you've trained for it. You've gotten there. You've gotten to this point. How can you give up now? And I think as we look at where we are, what happens at 13.1? You get through it, you're done, but now what? And I think that's that bridge into who's taking it from us when we get to the end of that race. Who is going to be the one that we hand off the baton, or we collapse in the arms of, to say, all right, we got it as far as we can go. Now what?
So can I pull at the word winning? Because that made me think of something really interesting. So I suspect we all grew up in the era of field day, and that was very competitive to earn those ribbons. And since then, we've started to mock generations who get participation trophies. In the workforce, in the future, which will look fundamentally different than the workforce we grew up in, do they care about winning?
I don't know how to answer that question, but I think it's a really provocative one. And so Field Day was an incredible day, and I don't think people can appreciate how excited it was. It was always sort of late spring. I'm going to say sort of early May, because everything was still dry. I give kids a break on participation trophies for very one specific reason. They didn't create the system of participation trophies. They just got it. So they didn't actually know anybody, and they didn't actually create it. So I don't know that they are wedded to this everybody gets a trophy concept. I mean, it was sort of thrust upon them, and they have just accepted that that's the thing. I do think at some level, and I coach sports. I'm around kids who compete all the time, and kids today understand winning. They also understand effort, and they understand commitment and practice, and this commitment to team, and like getting better at things. So there really is a commitment and a pledge to get better. So they're interesting in their own way. They're more process, less outcome. which is a terrific thing to do because you can't control the outcome. A referee might make a bad call or the ump might make a bad call, but if I've put in the work and if I've done the things to be successful and be ready for moments, I think that's what kids these days are really good at. And so, right, we can tease everybody for everybody gets a trophy, but I actually blame the parents. And I realize I just went on a little bit of a tangent there, but if you haven't watched kids play sports, I encourage you to go out, get your kids into sports, get them into playing, because it is sort of remarkable when you put they're actually all young leaders too. When you put young leaders in a little group and watching them form and watching them support and watching them navigate the world in their own little way is one of the things that I think is inspiring for me. And certainly I love doing it. I love being able to create the opportunity for that. That I don't know if it leads into how those kids are going to be leaders into the future, but I certainly hope so because they're doing a better job than we ever did.
Yeah, so that made me dig into my notes a little bit. And we've talked about this over the course of the podcast about how they have a language we never had. And I remember very vividly Tanya specifically talking about that. So a couple of the notes I had about kind of how, and this is really this Gen Z and coming of age group, but they name problems before they become crises. They have a language that we never had, and they have a willingness to communicate. And I think to the same generation of parents who created participation trophies, they're also willing to have these conversations. And I think about all of the conversations I have in the car on the way, usually home from school. And just tonight we were talking about, this challenge and middle school's rough. And it was rough in the 80s and 90s. It's rough today because you add in technology and weird things happen. But we had a conversation about back to kind of the winning idea of, well, this kid says he's the greatest and the smartest and all the ists. And I said, well, everybody can think of themselves as the greatest. It's when you project it or mirror it onto somebody else that it becomes the problem. And I said, it is absolutely okay for you to think, I'm really smart. But if you have to tell somebody you're really smart, I think that's when the problem comes in. And that's what's going to be really interesting about this generation is they have ownership over their emotions and their actions and an ability to dialogue across generations. Like there is never a because I said so moment in any of our conversations. And I think that is what's going to be really interesting as they continue to enter the workspace. And you see it in school now is why? Why should we matters more now than ever?
Well, I've seen that as we've hired summer interns and we've brought people in um, who are, 20. Um, and the whole concept of because doesn't really work. They want to understand it. They want to know why this system, why this process, why does this matter? Who is benefited by it? Who is, how does this make the world better? And I love it, honestly, because it's one of those things that challenges us. It challenges us to kind of question the why of the thing, right? And it is growing. It is um, an inquisitiveness that I don't remember having. Um, I was a somewhat shy kid, and so maybe that was part of it. But I will say, when I'm sitting at the dinner table with my girls and they ask me thoughtful questions about my day, as in, what was the hardest thing you had to do today? And I have to sit there for a minute and be like, well, there's been a lot of hard things. So let's think about how to use that conversation point. And there are times where I'm like, my God, would you please just I don't I don't care. Or, what was your favorite thing that you did today? Or what was your favorite moment? What was your favorite song that you heard when you were listening to the radio on the way home? But it's such a it's such a unique perspective to understand what other people are focused on, I never had that inquisitiveness. I never asked those questions. I never said to my parents, "Hey, what was the best part of your day today?" Right? It was like, "Let's eat dinner real fast and I got to go play with my Legos because that's what I want to do." The conversation, it wasn't about the conversation. And what I have seen from my kids, and they are 9 and 7, is this legitimate understanding of when my day is hard, they seek to find ways to make it better. Um, Whether it's through a conversation, I'm going to have to reach to grab something, or it's making one of these for me when I'm sitting on a Zoom, and they know, like they have an inherent awareness of what it is that is happening. And where does that come from, right? Where does that understanding of how to begin to help make something better come from in a 7-year-old? At the same time, what I worry about also is the reality or lack thereof of a social media environment, right? What are they seeing? And my kids are thankfully too young for their own social media world, but um, they understand the concept of likes. They understand the concept of the reach of a reel, how many plays it's gotten. And in my own stuff, they'll frequently ask me, "So, that picture, that video you posted of us bouncing around, dancing around, how many views did that get?" Right? Like, they're interested in understanding. There's a tangibleness to them, um, and how good or bad of that is something that I think we all have to seek to understand. But it ties again to kind of the understanding that things are bigger than just the world that they occupy, and I don't know, it's just a fascinating place to watch and see.
Phil, you said so many wonderful things that I want to capture, like a couple of them, and then put a challenge to actually managers in the local government profession today. Um, so you talked about courage. Kids have a different level of courage than maybe we had as youth. A willingness to ask questions, a willingness to sort of probe and to kind of dig into how was your day. That was like a really important part. Something you also said aligns with what Corey said in our last one, is about kids today have a different ability to care really deeply about their friends and their network, and kids their age. Like they are attuned to each other in a way that I can freely admit I am not, and probably will never be. So those two things come together, right? So an element of caring more deeply and of being more curious. And so this is a question maybe for both of you: is our organizations, uh, I won't speak for all organizations, but I'll say for most of them, there is a deficit of caring and there's a deficit of curiosity. So what is our responsibility to create an environment for people to ask an open question or to show more care? And so how do we actually have to change how we work in order to support and cultivate that new mindset that maybe we're not familiar with? And Dr. Spiegel, I'm going to you first.
So I think my answer is going to be really uncomfortable for a lot of people, and it ties directly, Phil, to what you said. And we're guilty of it with this podcast. Like, what was the reach? How long are people listening? We have become so obsessed with KPIs. We measure everything to measure it. Nobody actually says, well, maybe people are moving towards it, but traditionally it's been, oh, we're going to measure calls for service. This is my favorite one. I don't care, police, fire, whatever it is. We're going to measure calls for service. Okay, so you have 84,000 this year. What does 84,000 mean? Well, we need more resources just because we've had more calls. And so that has been the MO for a really long time, because organizations, and for good reason when it first started, right? Bureaucracies are slow behind the private sector. And so that whole wave happened through our career lifetime. And so we started measuring things and reporting on things because that was good and transparency was a magic word and we should do these things. But I don't remember in my 20 years really peeling that onion back and going, why? So what does it actually mean? And I remember conversations here about jobs. And when you're in a property tax state, you're really motivated by property tax. And we started to have conversations specifically around data centers, and that has like exploded in local government recently, and not particularly positively in some ways. So, a $250 million data center, great for the tax rolls. Well, it's only 60 jobs. Okay. But it's 60 jobs at 150 grand. Is that better or worse than 100 jobs at 40 grand, right? And so it was always the number for the sake of a number instead of really being output focused. And I think that goes back to this bigger conversation about what community means is we're going to have to change our goals and priorities and have some hard conversations about what does better look like and then how do we get there. And you're going to have to measure. You have accountability. You are the steward of public money. That is a huge responsibility. But I think we're at the era, and I will say this, I will get on a soapbox for a hot minute. We're seeing it's election season in a lot of communities, and we're seeing the provocateur candidates. I'm going to be accountability. I'm going to be, all these things. No, they're going to be provocateurs. They don't actually care about better. They care about noise. And I hope an election or two from now, we can get back to what service actually means from an elected perspective too.
So lots of good stuff there. I think one of the things that we are seeing that we were just kind of talking around the edges of is this curiosity about what does it mean. So yeah, 84,000 calls for service. Great. Why? What are we doing on those calls for service? That curiosity, that's seeking to understand. We joke about this. There's an article that I wrote and it got me a cover shot on a magazine that is our professions magazine. So I had dropped one off at my mom's house because that's what one does when they're on the cover of a magazine, right? You give it to mom. And my nephew, who is 27, stopped at my mom's house to say hi. And in doing so, she, of course, took it out and showed him. And what I loved, and I'm going to see him this weekend, and I'm so excited because we're going to talk about this. He says to me that the premise of the article is that the council manager form of government is good, that it has positive benefits for communities, that it makes the quality of life better, and that we should, as a profession, be working hard to support it, right? And he sent me 3 questions, very thoughtful, very deep questions about why. Why is an elected mayor perhaps not as effective without a city manager as with? Why? I don't understand. I'm curious about your perspective. I know that's what you do for a living, but I'm curious about how you get there, how you get to that place. And we have a family and friend rib fest coming up this weekend. And I'll be making some ribs, and so will he, and we'll have a lot of time on our hands to talk about that stuff. But I'll tell you, there's a little bit of anxiety for me. Am I going to do a good enough job proving to him my points? And I tell you what, that is great. That's what we should be doing. We should be working as hard as we can to think about what it is we've said or what it is we've committed ourselves to or what it is we have been signed up for, whether you're talking about programs, whether you're talking about departments, whether you're talking about policies, because those people are coming of age and those people who have this curious inquisitiveness want to know why 84,000 calls for service matters. So, are you doing anything good on those 84,000 calls? Or are you only doing something good on 22,000 of those 84,000 calls? And why are you doing the rest of them? Right? We have this chance to kind of take a step back from the things that we just assumed had to be, because we're being challenged by thoughtful minds who are saying, I don't know that I buy that. Prove it.
That was I have to say a couple of things in response. So number one, I want to be invited to the Corrali family Rib Fest at some point in my life, because I thought that sounds delicious and fun, and I think it would be great. I also you talked about like the innovate or the provocative question about why the council management reform of government is the best, and you immediately jump to I want to be worried about winning this argument, and I think that's maybe where the shift comes. You don't have to win the argument. You have to deepen the understanding, his perspective. So people often make these insane leaps of logic from this thing to a belief about the world without deepening their pool of knowledge, right? It's the ladder of inference that people just march up and very quickly assume that if this thing happened, then that must be the way the world works. And it's a shortcut. It's an easy way to think about the world, but it's often missing critical pieces. And part of our job then is to, I think, give people more context. And so rather than, this, you can take or leave this sort of suggestion. So as you're making ribs and standing over a pit or whatever the heck you guys would do, rather than try to win the argument, try to deepen each other's understanding of what we're after. I think that would be a fascinating conversation, because in a world that's deeply polarized, right? Sharks and jets, there's a way to maybe understand each other a little bit different and say, oh, I don't like the Jets, but I now understand them a little bit more. And that, I think, is the opportunity for people to come together with just a little bit of curiosity, with just a belly full of ribs, that maybe we could just get a little bit better.
So to
Is
use
this-
feel
is this my invitation? I'm coming.
Anytime. Get in the car right now, Mike. Get in the car right now. It's Michigan, so it's a little bit of a hike for you, but it's doable. It's doable. So it's funny that you call me out on that point, because as we're talking about field day, or we're talking about anything that I think back to elementary school, I was not the person who ever won field day, but I worked hard to be always in the top 2 or 3 of like the presidential fitness tests. Do you remember this? The sit and reach, like you gotta reach to a certain point, or you gotta run a mile at a certain pace or whatever. And it's a little bit of a problem that I still maintain, that you're completely right. It doesn't have to be about winning and losing. It has to be about helping each other better understand the perspectives, because the perspectives are what bring us together. It's not that we all always have to agree, or that somebody's going to be right and somebody's going to be wrong. How do we find that perspective? And I honestly, I think that's where my nephew's coming from this at. He's not seeking to find a way to tell me that my profession, my chosen career path is dumb, or that I shouldn't be doing it. He's seeking to understand why I think it's better, so that he can come to his own conclusion. Because he's going to be the one someday, maybe he runs for office, maybe he's just an engaged citizen, maybe he's just somebody who regularly pays their property taxes and they want to kind of feel like they know where they go to. He's going to be the one, 20 years from now, who's going to be saying, yeah, I feel like I'm getting good value for my money, or I'm not. And I want to live in that community. I want to live in that community. I want to be there. I don't want to be there. And these are the reasons why, right? I appreciate your reminder that it isn't about the plus and minus column.
Okay, but speaking of the plus and minus column, And you've talked about running in this episode. So I feel like it's a fair moment to celebrate a goal that you didn't set for yourself necessarily. But Phil, you run every day. How many consecutive days are you at?
Today is 1,123.
So when you started on day one, I suspect in your head it wasn't, I'm going to get to day 1,123. You made a very specific intentional goal for yourself, which I think we're going to talk about on a future episode. And every day you've committed to doing it, to showing up. And it wasn't about winning. It was about doing the thing that you decided to do. And so I wanted to recognize that because I have envy, speaking of Inside Out too, because I will never get to like 102 days, more or less, what you're at. So I wanted to celebrate you for that commitment because I think it's truly extraordinary. But I also want to bring this back to the generation we're talking about. We talked in episode 11 about them being the artist generation. That's the archetype. And Phil, you had shared a story about your daughters and your mom, their grandma, that I think it would be fascinating to share with those who follow along with us to understand how this is tracking multi-generationally and and we'll get into probably the grandma hobbies here in a little bit, but how their childhoods are reflecting other eras and how they're engaging across generations.
So, two things. First of all, thank you for the shout out. I will say at this point, it's a little bit of well, I can't stop now because I'll never get to this point again. So I just got to keep going. Um, I had intended to get to 21 days. And I remember my first challenge was the conference in Columbus, the ICMA conference in Columbus, and whether I was actually going to run every day because it was within the first month and a half of running. And I did on a treadmill, and I hate running on treadmills, but I did it. And so I will just say it this way. Don't let it become something that you loathe and you just do because you feel like you have to. Because I think that's where we lose the joy in it. I still enjoy it at the end. I don't always enjoy it at the beginning. I enjoy it at the end when it's over. And I've never once in my life regretted running. And it's in a lot of ways kept me sane. So my mom, who's 84, I'm the fifth of five kids. I was born 13 years after my closest sibling. And so I've got a lot of nieces and nephews who are well into their 30s at this point. And so for my mom, my kids being 9 and 7 is just this unique joy that she didn't necessarily expect she was going to have at this point in her life. And so there's this unique bond that my girls have with her. And they're very focused on going back to like being mindful about what others are dealing with and feeling, that she lives by herself. My dad passed away about 13 years ago. That she needs something to brighten her day. And so they will regularly draw pictures. And if we are not going to be able to drive out there to see her, to drop them off, we'll drop them in the mail. And when we get there the next time, they've been taped to the doors in kind of the entranceway to her house. And so she's got artwork all over the place that she sees every time she walks in the house, and the girls see every time they walk in the house. And they're this like mutual love of how can I show you more love, and how can I, and it's so, I wouldn't have done that for my grandparents ever. Like I loved my grandparents. They lived behind us. I had the opportunity to go over there all the time, but I wasn't like, oh, I can't. How can I make your day better? Right? Thinking like that. The other thing that they have done with her that really just kind of came, I don't even know how it started. Every time we go, they are sewing with my mom. And it's not needlepoint. My mother has never been an artist when it comes to this kind of thing, but how to sew a button onto a piece of fabric. And then my girls are like, "Oh, let's make a purse and let's make a little bag and let's make something else." And the three of them just lose themselves in this creative opportunity to just be together. Generations that are so far apart that maybe they shouldn't have a lot in common end up having an awful lot in common, and they just have this ability to be with each other. And we were just there on Sunday, and both of our girls, as we were driving away, said, "We're just so glad we get to go to grandma's house and have that experience." Like, again, I would never have said that. It would have been like, can we please go home? I just want to. But what they are experiencing is like this transference of joy from grandmother to granddaughter, from elder human to younger human, and they mutually find so much value in it. And it's always inspiring to me. And it's kind of a hassle, right? We got to get there. It's Sunday. There's 500 things going on, but what I've, again, like running, have never once regretted those opportunities for my girls to interact with my mom, because I don't know how long they're going to have that. But to see how that melding of minds happens is just, it's wonderful. It's wonderful to watch.
I get goosebumps periodically on the show. That was one of those moments, Phil. I just, there's something so sweet and wholesome about that sort of story. And I'm going to share something. A friend of mine was talking about episode 11, which if you haven't listened to, you should absolutely go back and listen to, because it's going to make this one a lot more interesting. They said, "I really appreciate how you can talk about different generations without being critical of them." Because that's sort of the bit in our modern era is, right, you have to polarize, or you have to make others somebody else, and like they're good or we're good and they're bad. And the number of times I've gotten feedback from people who are like, "You know what? You guys are on to the reason that this podcast is interesting to sort of listen to and watch is because it's not about bringing anything down. It's about sort of introducing topics and building things up." Corey, I'm going to turn it over to you, because I know that you're smarter than all of us. So we need you to actually help us get
100%.
But you and I have talked about this very topic. Like, there is a very specific thing. Like, we purposefully try to be positive about what's going on in the world, even when it is chaotic and stressful.
So it's funny you bring it up and framed it that way. I was scrolling through social media a little bit today, and the free speech thing has been rolling around in my head lately, and watching my friends, people I've known my whole life, 20 years of my life, on what are very divisive sides, not be willing to engage civilly with each other, right? Which social media, someday I'll look into the science behind it and figure it out. But that got me thinking about, okay, so in America, one of the things that makes us distinct is free speech, and something we should hold dear. But the consequence of that is, just because you can say it doesn't mean you should. And I think that's one thing I've noticed, that I've become increasingly more sensitive to it. I don't know if it's because of what I went through professionally, or being a parent, or just the time we're living in is, yep, we can all say lots of things. But isn't it interesting on how people choose what they choose to say? And so when we started this venture, it was very important to each of us that we are going to lift up. We're going to lift up the profession. We're going to lift up our generation. We're going to lift up through, Phil, what did you say? Really real. We're going to be honest, but we're going to do it with kindness and integrity. And I'm proud of that. And when I do something on social media and I'll scroll, and there, you have that instinct to be like, did you really need to say that? Like, was the world a better place because you said that? And every time I just keep scrolling because that's what adults do. And but I'm like, people have taken that privilege and turned it into something it doesn't need to be. And so I think that's where we have tried to be different, and even in our professional lives and every aspect of our life, that if I'm going to say it, it's going to have real meaning, either for change, for the better, but I'm never going to intentionally put somebody on blast, because that's not how I'm going to spend my life or my energy.
It's an interesting way you phrase that, and I am going to say a couple of things. So I tend, like, close circuit to you two, I tend to say really provocative things with some force. It's part of the bit, and I do it sometimes to sort of shock the system, and sometimes to spur change, because I often, um, you know, we don't have the ability to influence everything every day, despite, maybe our desires to 20 years ago, we thought we should. But I think I've kind of wised up over time. But I am still willing to say provocative things when it will require somebody else to look at something different or maybe make a change. And the flip side is also true. So in my organization, I have a leadership team, and I think I said this a couple of weeks ago. They are listening to the podcast to try to understand me better, was right. It's like, talk about, don't be careful what you wish for, but they're talking about it openly, and I'm getting challenged in my work environment in a far different way and a far better way, because sometimes you could give a directive at work and you just, people assume that you're the boss, but they miss those 2 or 3 sentences that actually led to that thing. And because this is sort of an open forum, I'm sharing sort of my own thought process, and it's helping them. And they are now challenging me more directly, which I could not be more thrilled about, because it's actually making me more reflective. It's making me a better leader. And so the last thing I'll say is, the sharing of just how you think about the world and how you approach problems and how you're there does actually invite more dialogue and more, ultimately, better outcomes. And so, thank you for sharing that. And again, the ability to be respectful in that is the critical piece. And I am just so grateful for both of you, B, my team, and also then for this broader profession that we work in, that we do strive to get better. And part of that is the feedback that we get.
So, Mike, I think one of the things that's worth saying is that you are provocative in what you say, but I don't think there's mean-spiritedness or irreverence in that effort, right? You have strong opinions, and you're seeking to understand and seeking to get people to think. And I think you've done that. You do that with us, whether we're online or offline. I will sometimes, you know, jump a little bit when I see a text message come back from you. And it's not because I think it's being that you're trying to do anything but get me to think, um, or to get a reaction, not a visceral one, but a real one. Like, why do you think that? Why would that be true? Why That's not right, whatever. So I think the hard part when we apply those things in a leadership environment is it's very frightening for people to be in a situation where they're being challenged. Um, they're going to do what I did to some degree with my nephew. They're going to say, I got to win. He's pushing at me because he doesn't believe me, or he doesn't trust me, or he doesn't think I'm doing my job well. So I gotta build my case. I gotta win. Right. And that, I think, ties into what, Corey, you were just saying about the social media environment. It never has rewarded accuracy. It rewards, are you kidding? Did you really just say that out loud? Because you've just stopped on that post. And guess what happens when you stop on that post? That post tracks. And now suddenly it's more popular in a feed because more people are stopping in their tracks and saying, whoa. And maybe they're commenting, maybe they're not, but they're still stopping. And so we reward kind of this audaciousness, mean-spirited audaciousness in many cases, without really understanding that it really does not elevate anything other than tracking numbers. It does not elevate the discussion. It does not make us feel better. It does not make us feel more positive or whatever. It makes us angry or frustrated. Or are you kidding me? You're going to post that or you're going to say that? Audacity is a thing. And so I think as we contemplate that in the context of leadership, and I'm thinking about this a lot lately in my organization as we go through some stuff, how we speak to one another and how, more importantly, we hear one another is so critically important to getting to what it is we're trying to do. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's the simplest thing or you're trying to balance a budget and you've got every department in the room trying to come up with a plan. When we're throwing stuff at each other just to win, we're never winning. You win in a moment and you've lost all of those opportunities to find those common ground, to find that better understanding of each other, to find that better path toward what it is that we're trying to do in public service, which is to do better overall. It's just that we're not wired for it automatically. We have to pull ourselves back from it.
So in the last episode, we talked about kind of individualism, right? That is the crux of the childhood we grew up in. And the pendulum swing is collectivism, right? So naturally, the cycle will shift over. And so if there's any silver lining, and you had shared a great podcast with us on meme culture, and that's exactly what it is, right? It's that instantaneous serotonin hit of, sucks to be you, and move on, right? And so I think meme culture has in many ways, instead of provoking the idea, Mike, which is what you do very thoughtfully, because the desire is better, provoking an idea, a conversation about what or why, is very different than attacking who. And so as we look at the generation that's coming up, and they have been over technologized, we'll call it, the digital natives, I think that's where some of the interesting stuff about the grandma hobbies come in, is because it actually allows them to disconnect and focus in a way that they've never done. And Phil, your girls draw. My son draws. He does Legos. I'll share, because as you and I were talking about this the other day, I'm like, oh, I have an example of this in my office. So my mom does glass. She does fused glass and stained glass. So my house is decorated in grandma designed glass. But every trip when she comes to visit, they design something together. And so for those who know, my kiddo likes maps and countries and geography. And so they designed an ornament, which she then made into glass. And so this is the shtick. They design ornaments every year. They do this. And it's the one time where he genuinely does not focus on his technology. It might be there for white noise, the same way that we had the TV on. But he very intently focuses on making sure it's right, so that whatever grandma takes turns out excellent. And I think that's what you're going to see is this era of so much noise and not kindness, right? We go back to Inside Out 2. They have words we didn't, but at the end of the day, joy is really simple. And the simple things, whether or not you coach your kids in sports or sit at the kitchen table and draw a picture together, I think that's where the magic can happen. So to take it back to leaders listening or younger generation who are just feeling like, I'm drowning, this isn't fun right now, intentionally stop and take a moment and do something analog and go buy the pack of crayons and a white sheet of paper and just draw. You will be shocked at how fulfilled you are on the other side of whatever you do.
I got the warm fuzzies again. So this is like 2 for 2. So you guys are this is why I just want to spend more time with you both because it actually just feels good to hear. And it's not even campy wholesomeness. I mean, it actually is wholesomeness. Like it's just the stories that you tell are really incredible. So as you guys know, I have taught the HPO model at a couple of different places at UVA and at College of Charleston, and it is decidedly analog, right? The slide, we use flip charts, we use colored markers, and for those who have been through the program, there are specific colors for everything. And I'm thinking about my own sort of leadership team. And I can tell you, I've just had a brainstorm sort of moment where I'm going to invite the leadership team and we're going to sit in the conference room and we're going to take a problem, right? Whatever the problem is, right? So the ambulance fund is currently underwater and we're going to have to fix it. And how does that work? Just for fun, I'm going to give everybody a bunch of markers and say, draw out your preferred solution. It's not a memo. It's not a spreadsheet. I want you to draw it out in story form about what do you think is the best way to solve this problem? So it's an invitation for everybody else to sort of encourage, and we tend to be a lot of Gen Xers, and so a couple of millennials. So it's going to be super uncomfortable for police and fire to probably have to play with markers. But I wonder if the solution isn't going to be a little bit better if you force somebody to move into the other side of their brain. So closed circuit to my own team, we're going to be drawing next week. It's going to be incredible. And Phil, you said a couple of things that I was struck by some of your stories in this invitation for calm and sort of listening. Those are the words I wrote down. I actually have a new pen this week. I have red pen this week, which is great. I don't know in our organizations that we actually teach the skill of listening to one another with intensity, right? As you were just sort of describing the sort of, if you're arguing about who gets cut in which budget, there's going to be debate camp is going to form and there's going to be sides that are chosen. And as you guys know, I like to tell boring stories. And so my friend Craig Gerhardt was the county executive in Prince William County. And he was the budget director for years and then became the county executive. And when he became the county executive, he said, I'm no longer going to do the budget. You are. And he gave it to the team. And it took about 3 years before them to kind of figure out how to make it work. And at one point, they got down to sort of like the last $100,000 of a huge budget. And he expected, it wound up being like, the human services and police department were down and they were kind of the last two groups that needed something. And the police chief was like, well, if you cut your social worker, we're going to be busier. So why don't you take the money and then we'll have fewer calls? And, Craig sort of, he has this great joke. He's like, I figured he would have fought harder. And the police chief was like, it's not about fighting. It's about doing better. And he worked at that for years to build an organizational culture that could say, no, this other thing is as important as my thing and actually helps my thing. And that's maybe, I think, it's part of the work that we're supposed to do. It's also the stories that we should highlight rather than sort of dominating. And, you talk about meme culture, about winning over or getting the serotonin hit. No, it's actually about something bigger and something more important, and cultivating space that we can stop and pause and think about what's bigger and what's more important is sort of our challenge.
So I think you're going to see that happen a lot over this next, let's call it a 5-year window. And I remember going through budget cut years because you have this conversation about methodology. Is it across the board? Does everybody have to feel 5% vain? Or do we collectively start to analyze what better looks like? And when you're playing around the increment, this goes back to WD-40 and duct tape. So here's MacGyver. When you're playing around the increment, it's easier to be like, well, we should all just hurt a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's what's going to happen in this last phase of this turning. I think they're going to have to be really hard conversations because the whole funding structure is changing. The workforce is changing. Citizen expectations are changing. And it's going to be a little bit of let's throw the baby out with the bathwater on this one and figure out if we do the best we can do for the community that exists today. We're not talking about 1985 anymore. Now, I remember conversations in the neighborhood, not my neighborhood, just certain neighborhoods were like, well, police cars used to drive through and we felt safer. And when I just said that, you could even think of the demography of who made the statement, because there were other neighborhoods that had a very different reaction to what a police car in the neighborhood meant. And the community was never having those conversations. The police department might have. Even the elected officials really weren't. And so I think everything is going to have to be fair game, right? What is a truly essential service at the local government level might look different. You know, Mike, you talked about the ambulance fund. The fact that over time, fire departments became ambulatory transport, and the data is out there, fire departments in most communities don't put out fires anymore. It's not the service they provide anymore because we've gotten safer, which is good. We are so much safer. But we've never changed the business model. Like, it's evolved, but we've never had a conversation about what different looks like. Do I need to roll $1 million reg to a hip fall? Like, is that the right thing? And those are going to be really hard conversations to have, but I'm fairly certain they're going to be the ones that get had over the next 5 years as we finish out this cycle.
That's a really great example of the struggle of where we're going to find ourselves, right? When those budgets get really tight, the real conversations about what is necessary are the most difficult conversations to have. Because if we were doing it today, for instance, and I'm in Illinois, I am in the land of local governments. We have more than anybody else by thousands. We have special districts for every purpose. We have whatever you can imagine, right? If we were doing it today versus the way we did it when they were all set up, would we do it the same way? And the answer inevitably must be no. Of course we wouldn't. Of course we wouldn't have multiple school districts all over the place. Of course we wouldn't have multiple special purpose districts. But how do you break all of those things and not do it that way anymore without upturning the apple cart? And I think we saw a lot of that in 08, 9, and 10, right? We saw government really kind of saying to itself, all right, we can't do this all anymore. So how do we do it differently? And then you built out a lot of cooperative agreements and you built out a lot of joint purchasing efforts, but you didn't really start talking about the hard stuff, right? The hard stuff of, wouldn't it be better if we had regional fire districts versus fire departments for every community? Wouldn't it be better if we thought about water as a collective resource in a region as opposed to multiple single municipalities sharing it with other multiple single municipalities? If you think about the best way forward, you find yourself questioning why. And I'll say, we're in the midst of some of those conversations in this region. They're hard. They're difficult to kind of get past the politics of it, to get past the feelings. And I just wonder as we work forward, and I keep coming back to my nephew asking those questions. We're going to get those questions from our communities. We're going to get those questions from our elected officials. We're going to get those questions from our own employees. Are you kidding me? Why are we still doing this way? This seems so like, come on, 1995. It's 2030 after all. We gotta let's get out of the 20th century. So we have to find ways to be able to have those conversations. And going back to what you both have been saying, we have to start listening to each other to find that purpose in where better is and how we get there and how we thoughtfully approach it. And yeah, you break a few eggs to make some omelets or whatever the saying is, but it doesn't have to be with mean-spiritedness. It doesn't have to be with a winning mindset because there's a losing group over here. How do we be mindful of change that can be inclusive of those things that are important and those people's perspectives that are important, so that we're not forgetting them in that transition to whatever the better thing is that we build back from this era.
So I think one of the interesting things is the definition of better, right? We get stuck as you were talking through that. I got thinking about, would you do it differently? Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you? Well, one change is hard, and at least in my experience, it's the perception of giving up power. So if we go to consolidated X, Y, or Z, we don't have control anymore, as though we are the only ones that could possibly do it or do it the right way. And so I think that gets back to a lot of what we talked about in episode 11 is we have to let go and admit that things are broken, because they are. The way it's always been done served its purpose in its era, but that era is gone and it's leaving us fast. And this idea that lines on a map somehow matter in the way that we give them power is something our kids will completely disagree with, because lines on a map are irrelevant to them in a completely digital world.
Wow. So Corey, last week you said one of the most provocative and profound things I'd heard in a long time, and then you did it again this episode. So because it is so insightful that maps used to have power in an analog age, and they don't anymore. And so I want to. This is sort of coming full circle, right? So this ability to be curious about the question, to be courageous about asking it, and then this willingness to let go of the preconceived answer. There's sort of a secret sauce in those three things, and I'm trying to think of in my own organization, right? How do I cultivate an environment that puts those three things on the table at the same time? And I will say, you know, I have a tremendous amount of respect for elected officials who raised their hand and said, I'll speak up on behalf of everybody. I think it's one of the most admirable things that people do. They don't do it for a lot of money. They do it because they care about their communities. So maybe we start that conversation at our team level or at our department head level. And I'm going to tell one more story because I mentioned Craig Gerhardt, and I did not mean to tell two Craig Gerhardt stories in one day, but he's terrific, and so I'm going to do that. And this also goes to Tony Gardner, who I had mentioned previously, and they talk about the on 9/11 at the Pentagon, the airplane hits, and it actually hit in such a way that it actually penetrated 4 of the 5 rings in the Pentagon, and the incident commander set up a perimeter about 200 yards behind where the plane entered. So the incident commander could see absolutely nothing. And they deployed their teams, and there was a crew of firefighters that were on the roof of the Pentagon. They put holes in the roof so the heat and the smoke could come out. And this is a sort of a junior firefighter, a third-year firefighter, looks over and sees a girder that is, he just has some sort of a feeling. He's not an architect, but he's like, this doesn't look right. But is able to see below, and he sees that there's a team of firefighters fighting the fire in there. Bypasses the entire chain of command and goes to the incident commander and says, the girder's going to break. Get everybody out now. The incident commander, who can't see anything, trusts this person. The team escapes. 45 seconds later, the girder collapses, and no other lives are lost. And to think about the things that it would take to build a system where you would trust the person on the front line with no training or background in a building experience, knowing anything about structural engineering, can make a call in a moment and be trusted and valued and respected, that, you know what, they are on the ground and know what's going on. I'm going to trust that this is what they do. Takes incredible courage. It's courage on that firefighter to make that call, to bypass an entire chain of command. Some curiosity to be interested to look what's going on over there. It really does. And then for the incident commander to then let go of this perceived power, I think is maybe the perfect example of sort of what we're talking about. And the beauty is we can actually do it. We can actually make uh, our staff more curious. We can actually encourage courageousness, and we can, as managers, let go of whatever perceptions of power exist.
We're not going to get into it tonight, but one of these days we have to have a conversation about the power of intuition. And I am a huge believer in the fact that intuition can drive us in the right direction. That firefighter understood based off of what he saw, not based off of what he may have been trained to do, but because his eyes saw something, his brain processed it, and he said, that's a problem. We've got to deal with it. I don't know why, but I know it's going to be a problem. We got to do something about it. And I have seen that in action over the years in my own career, and it is so undervalued. It is so dismissed in many cases. I've had debates with people who I am not at all at their same level in terms of their stature in this profession, where I have said intuition is important, and they're like, absolutely, intuition is the worst thing you could possibly rely on. And I'm like, disagree. So anyway, one of these days we'll have that deeper and broader conversation about that. But I think the most important thing you just said, Mike, is how do we create the spaces for people to be able to express what they are seeing, to be able to raise their hand and say, oh my gosh, we really got to think about this thing. We got to do something before something bad happens, before that girder falls, because they're seeing it and they understand it and they know it. And to try to circle it back into the younger up and coming generations, the things that my daughters, who are again Gen Alpha, right? Alpha, yes, sorry. The things that they perceive that I never perceived at their ages is teaching me so much about the world. And that's what's going to take us through this crazy period. Those folks are going to say, we understand, we see it, we're coming up with a plan. We may not do it right the first time, but damn it, we're going to try it again. We're going to keep going. It's inspirational when we have the ability to kind of see, even in these very small people, the willingness to be empathetic, thoughtful, considerate of what other people are dealing with and going through, and then applying that to whatever situation they're in the midst of. So it is a hopeful time when we can see that those things, those folks, are the future.
So a couple things to tie up what both of you said. Mike, in the 9/11 story, and I think this is true across generations and at least recent history in the profession, we do really well with those things during a crisis. When everybody says, rule book, we ain't got time for no rule book. That's when you see exceptional happen, because people, Phil, to your point about intuition, people can't overthink it. You don't have time. You have to trust. Like, it is the ultimate trust fall, right? You all have to lean in and make it happen. And I think it's hard to do that when you're not in a time of chaos, because it almost doesn't feel right, right? The old adage, you don't have to fix what's not broken. And that doesn't really lean into this idea of continuous improvement. And Phil, when you talk about your daughters, and we've all talked about this both online and off, this generation is growing up with a listening and a hearing skill set that I don't think we really understand the power of yet, because they are very intuitive about all of the senses, but their keen one, their superpower, is what they hear. They hear in tones the way we might feel and react to emojis, right? It is a short circuit hardwire that is going to be fascinating to watch as they develop, as they go through additional education and enter the workforce, because we might be able to give each other a side eye and we know what that means, but they hear the inflection in voices and interpret it with accuracy also, which is fascinating, in ways that I will just continue to be envious of forever.
I feel like that's the perfect segue into our next batch of episodes, because I think you're right. You and I have talked about this, right? And when kids learn from Zoom and they sit in the classroom and they hear their friends and their colleagues talk the whole time, they do pick up on those cues far more differently. So this has been great. Right, we joke often about how we don't, like, you guys do show prep, I don't do anything. I brought a pen today, which was great. Phil, I saw that you had a printed run of show, so welcome back to the real world. The balance has been restored to the universe. Corey, thank you for organizing everything. You are right, our strategist and our thinker, and you're not a mad professor, but you are an organized professor, and so you bring a seriousness to the work. And I think that was the other thing I was going to share today. Is I've heard from a couple of colleagues who just value how different we all are and how we can each, we do, right? There's some sort of like, we come together, there's like a secret sauce and we each play a role. I think we are truly our authentic selves in this, and it kind of works. And so this is the sales pitch that we have to make, because we're obligated to make. But if you like what you're hearing, just like subscribe to the channels. I don't know where they are, but I'm sure that you guys can figure out how to like and subscribe. And again, kudos to the people on LinkedIn who reached out to me directly. It does mean a lot. Feedback was interesting, and it doesn't have to be good or bad. I just appreciate the feedback, and so I know that there are a lot of folks out there who have liked what we've done. We're going to continue to do it. We're on episode 12. I feel like we're going to do a couple more. And if you're going to be going to the ICMA conference, you can see. Right, the largest collection of local government managers around the world will be in Tampa in less than a month. So I'll see you guys in Tampa. We are going to do an episode in Tampa, so stay tuned. We're going to do a live podcast. I don't know how many guests we'll have, but I'm going to guess it's going to be somewhere probably between, I don't know, 30 or 50 friends and colleagues who show up and say hi. So stay tuned, like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys soon. Thanks.